All right, ready to jump in. You sent me a ton on this East Baltimore Development Initiative, EBI.
Yeah, the EBDI.
Talk about a story with layers. We're talking
Yeah.
legal papers,
Oh, yeah?
news articles going back years, even a peek into the relocation plans.
Wow.
This isn't just about buildings and biotech, though. This is about the people
Right.
who call East Baltimore home.
Yeah, understanding the people is key for this kind of project.
So let's give everyone the need to know on EBDI. The good, the bad, the complicated. One thing that really jumps out from all this is the contrast. Almost like a tale of two cities.
Oh, a perfect way to put it, yeah. You've got Johns Hopkins on the one hand, this massive medical institution with billions.
Right, world-renowned.
And then right there, next door, practically, is Middle East, one of the most impoverished and honestly dangerous neighborhoods in Baltimore.
And the tension between these two neighbors, it's palpable. I mean, the president of Johns Hopkins once called Middle East the worst crime area in the United States.
Can you imagine?
And then you have a longtime resident comparing Johns Hopkins' expansion to slavery days. Talk about some serious baggage.
It goes way deeper than just, like, physical proximity.
It's about power, resources, who shapes the future of East Baltimore.
Yeah.
And this EBDI thing, this isn't even the first attempt to revitalize the area, right? Back in the 90s, there was HEBCAC, the Historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition.
EBCAC, they had a much different approach.
Yeah, they were more about fixing up individual houses
Spot fixes.
instead of tackling the whole neighborhood, like trying to stop a flood with a single bucket. One reporter even said they were trying to halt beach erosion with a pail and shovel.
Totally outmatched.
And that's where EBDI comes in, with a much bolder, more aggressive plan. We're talking large-scale demolition, brand new construction, a completely different philosophy.
A whole other philosophy.
And that brings us to one of the thorniest parts of this whole thing, eminent domain.
Oh, yeah.
The government basically saying, we need your land, even if you don't want to sell. Necessary evil.
It's a complicated tool. The government has to prove it's for public use and offer just compensation to the property owners.
But, and here's where it gets even more interesting, Baltimore has this quick take process where the city can take over property super fast, like within days,
Wow, so fast.
before the final price is even settled.
Yeah, that creates a lot of stress for those homeowners.
And even when that just compensation is paid, it's based on fair market value. But that doesn't capture the human cost of losing your home, does it? Can you put a price on memories?
Absolutely. Upending someone's life, their roots, you can't quantify that.
So to try and address that, EBI put together this incredibly detailed relocation assistance plan. We're not just talking about the bare minimum required by the federal government.
Yeah, really went above and beyond.
Yeah, they tapped into funding from Johns Hopkins
And the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
to create something much more comprehensive. And get this, EBI assigns each displaced household a dedicated family advocate, someone who sticks with them through the entire process, even after they've moved.
Wow, a guide through the process.
It's not just pointing people to a new apartment. It's about addressing the deeper needs that come with being uprooted from your home, your community. Job training, childcare, financial counseling, even legal aid.
It's a huge transition.
But before we get into all the details,
Yeah.
there's another big piece of this puzzle, the promise of minority inclusion. EBI set some pretty ambitious goals for economic opportunity, particularly for minority and women-owned businesses.
They set specific targets.
Yeah, like how much of the contracting dollars and employment hours would go to these groups. And from what we've seen in the data, they've actually exceeded those goals.
What I've seen, too.
Sounds impressive. But the big question is it just temporary? Like a bump while the construction is happening? Time will tell.
Time will tell.
With a project this big and this complex, we're really just seeing the early chapters.
Oh, for sure.
So many questions still out there. Will the promised affordable housing actually be enough?
Right.
Will the people who are displaced be able to come back if they want to?
And will those jobs...
Will those new jobs require a degree that most folks in the neighborhood don't have? Okay, let's take a closer look at that EBDI relocation assistance plan. Let's hear how they structured it, what kind of impact it's actually having on people's lives.
Let's do it. Okay, so this EBDI Relocation Assistance Plan, they went all out to help folks through this.
And can you believe they actually start reaching out to residents even before anyone has to move? They send out this general information notice.
Oh, a heads up?
Exactly. But here's the thing. They include the name and contact info for their assigned family advocate right in the notice. They're establishing that personal connection from day one.
Smart. Less bureaucratic.
And those family advocates, They're not just city employees sitting in an office somewhere. They're actually from local community organizations, so they're already familiar with the neighborhood, the people who live there.
Building trust. Understanding.
They work with each household to create a custom plan, a household support plan.
Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. Because it's not just finding a new place to live. These plans can include things like job training, help with childcare, figuring out finances, even legal assistance. Some advocates are even attorneys, helping with things like tenant rights, estate planning, all kinds of things.
They really thought of everything. It's more than just moving boxes. It's a major life transition.
And the support doesn't end there. Once the city officially decides to acquire a property, residents get connected with a relocation counselor.
Things start to feel real.
Yeah, the counselor walks them through the available benefits, helps them start looking for a comparable place to live, and make sure they understand their legal rights.
And they're upfront about what kind of assistance folks can expect. No one's left in the dark.
Transparency is key, especially when you're talking about losing your home.
And remember, we're talking about multiple layers of assistance here. You've got the baseline stuff required by federal law, things like the Uniform Relocation Act, which sets the national standard for these situations, and then EBDI piles on even more support.
And that's where the funding from Johns Hopkins and the Annie E. Casey Foundation comes in. They've poured millions into this effort.
They were really generous. Homeowners could get up to $70,000 in assistance, plus help with closing costs on a new home. Renters get rental assistance for like 3.5 years, help with moving expenses, security deposits, even property tax increases. Sounds like they threw the kitchen sink at this problem.
It's not just throwing money at it, though. They really emphasize choice and guidance throughout the process.
I'm curious about that. What does that look like?
Well, they have these relocation contractors who help residents find suitable housing options. They actually encourage people to explore different neighborhoods throughout Baltimore, not just stay in a certain area.
So they're not trying to keep people confined.
Exactly. They even arrange neighborhood tours and offer counseling for folks who might be hesitant about moving to a new community. It's like they're trying to expand people's horizons, showcase the possibilities.
It's great. It sounds like they're empowering folks to make the best decisions for their families.
And on top of that, remember how EBDI is building all this new housing? Well, they've committed to giving displaced residents priority access.
So they could move back if they want to.
They get first dibs on those new apartments and condos. And they have policies in place to make sure a good chunk of it stays affordable. It's not just for the wealthy folks moving in.
So they're trying to create a mixed income community.
And those family advocates, they don't just disappear. They stick around to provide ongoing support, help residents navigate any challenges, connect them with resources. They're there for the long haul.
It really is a remarkable effort. This whole relocation program is incredibly comprehensive and compassionate.
It sets a high bar for these kinds of projects.
But even with all this support, I'm sure there were some bumps along the way, right? I mean, some people probably weren't happy about this no matter what.
Oh, for sure. EBDI faced some pushback.
So pushback. What were people most concerned about?
Well, a lot of folks felt like they weren't being heard.
I can see that with a project this big.
Like the whole planning process was too top-down. To EBDI's credit, though, they did make some changes based on what they heard from the community.
Okay, like what? What did they actually change?
Well, remember those extra relocation benefits we were talking about?
The ones on top of the federal requirement?
Yeah.
You-
Initially, they were going to give people less money if they moved to a different part of the city,
Yeah.
and nothing at all if they left Baltimore.
Interesting.
So the idea was to encourage people to stay in East Baltimore.
Keep them in the neighborhood.
It backfired, though.
Oh, I bet.
Community groups were outraged. They basically accused EBI of trying to control where people could live, even hinted at some racial bias.
Wow.
EBDI did end up changing the policy, though.
Okay, good.
Now they offer full benefits to anyone staying in Baltimore City.
Much better.
So they went from a pretty restrictive policy to one that's much more inclusive.
Gave people more freedom.
Yeah, let them choose where they wanted to rebuild their lives.
And that whole thing about the demolitions, I read somewhere that residents were worried about all the dust.
Yeah, the dust and the debris, especially the lead and asbestos.
That's especially with kids.
Absolutely. No one wants their kids breathing that stuff in.
So how did EBDI handle that?
They actually stopped the demolitions until everyone had been relocated,
Really?
put people's health and safety first, ahead of the project's timeline.
That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the big stuff either.
What do you mean?
Well, like, if someone was selling their property to the city and they thought the offer was too low, they could get a third appraisal. And the Annie E. Casey Foundation would pay for it.
So they wouldn't get ripped off.
Exactly.
Sounds like they try to think of everything.
They went above and beyond to make sure people felt heard and supported through this whole thing. It wasn't perfect, but they really tried to get it right.
So where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway from all this EBDI stuff?
I think it shows just how complicated these big urban development projects are.
Yeah,
It's not as simple as bulldozing a neighborhood and starting over.
because there are people living there.
Exactly. You have to think about the people who are already there, their stories.
It's like a balancing act,
Hmm.
trying to build something new and exciting, but also respect the history and the people who made the place what it is.
Exactly. And EBDI, even with all its problems, shows that you can do both. You can have those big plans, but still be sensitive to what the community needs.
But it takes more than just wanting to do the right thing,
Right. You have to put in the work, communicate constantly, be willing to change course if something isn't working.
And even then, there's no guarantee it'll all work out.
Exactly. We're still seeing how the EBDI story plays out. We don't know yet if they'll be able to deliver on all those promises.
So many questions. Will the folks who were displaced be able to come back? Will they be able to afford to live in the new East Baltimore? Will those jobs be available to the people who lived there before?
It all comes down to whether EBDI actually makes life better for the people who call East Baltimore home.
And that brings us to the question we want you, the listener, to think about.
If you lived in East Baltimore and you were facing the possibility of losing your home, what would your biggest worry be?
What would make you feel like this project was a real opportunity, not just being forced out? We've given you a lot to think about today. This is just the start of the conversation, though.
It is.
BDI is complex. There are a lot of nuances. We want you to keep exploring, learn more, and come to your own conclusions.
Keep those questions in mind because the future of East Baltimore and so many other places like it depends on finding solutions that work for everyone.